Hello and welcome to Around the World with Dane Waters. I'm your host, Dane Waters, and it's a pleasure to be here as it is every week. We have a very good cast of characters to talk to today, so it's very exciting. We're going to talk about Ukraine, we're going to talk about Kenya, we're going to talk about global politics. But before we get started, I get this opportunity to kind of, banter, as I like to say, and just kind of espouse, I wouldn't say wisdom, but we'll just kind of talk about a few things. Normally, I kind of recap the world and what's happening, but I want to talk about peace and what is peace. Because there's all this conversation about, and we'll talk with our first guest about this, is that Donald Trump is pushing peace. The one thing I want the world to recognize, at least in my humble opinion, there's a difference between peace and capitulation. There really is. So, listen, I don't like war. I don't want war. I don't like people dying. I don't like innocent people dying, especially. I don't like children being stolen, which we'll talk about here in the first segment. But the reality is that what you saw at the White House yesterday, where you had the European leaders there supporting President Zelensky, and it's all about, okay, you have to give up land, you have to give up land, you have to give up land. I mean, Putin is going to win. What's happening now is Putin is winning, and the world has to recognize that. And a friend of mine just before the show here wrote me, said that, yeah, it looks like Zelensky's going to have to trade some land. There's no trading land. He's every bit of land that's being discussed is land that's Ukrainian. So he's not trading anything. He's just giving the opportunity to keep some land that belongs to the country anyway. That is not peace. Okay? That is not peace. What we're heading into, in my opinion, is this peace deal, or whatever we want to call it, is the precursor to World War III, in my opinion. It is the opening act. Once we establish that it's okay to take land by force, that changes the dynamics politically, globally, and it changes everything that we know in this world. And I want the world to understand that, because Donald Trump is talking about peace, 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 and everybody's saying, great, we're going to have peace, people are going to stop dying. That is not, what's happening is not right. It's just not. The world should unite, the good should unite, defeat Russia, kick Russia out of Ukraine, so territorial integrity is protected, children are returned, and the basic tenets of civilization are protected. So what is happening now, no matter how excited people want to be, is not a positive development, in my opinion. So that's my own personal opinion, but we'll talk about it more in the upcoming show. Anyway, let's take a quick break from Around the World with Dane Waters, and we'll be back with our first guest. Thank you. Welcome back to Around the World with Dane Waters. I am still your host, Dane Waters. I hope my audio is working now. So I was just, modern technology. No matter where I am in the world, the office or the headquarters or the control room, as I should say, likes to message me and say, please kindly check your audio settings. So hopefully now it is there, or maybe, I know, it could be intentional that they're trying to keep me silent. Who knows? Anyway, let's get started here. I am pleased to welcome Graham Davies from the UK. Welcome, Graham, for being here today.
Delighted
Graham
to be
is
here.
Wait, let's see if I get this right. Graham is the communications director for the UK Friends of Ukraine. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So before we get started and we talk about all the stuff dealing with Ukraine, tell us, what is the UK Friends of Ukraine, and what do you guys focus on?
Well, the main project that we are focusing on above all else is the Return the Children campaign. Between the start of hostilities in 2014 and now in 2025, Russia has abducted, at the very least, 19,500, or maybe as many as 75,000 Ukrainian children, and told them that their parents are dead, when in fact they're not. They've forced them to either learn Russian for the first time, or to make sure that they don't speak Ukrainian again in the future, and they're turning them into Russian citizens that could be adopted by Russian parents. And essentially, they are trying to make sure that they are stealing the next generation of Ukrainian citizens. And I believe that this is the world's biggest and most invisible war crime.
Well, it's interesting you say that because we have a lot to talk about in regard to the meeting that just took place in Washington yesterday. But I remember, by the way, yeah, as you know, I've spent a lot of time in Ukraine, and the stolen children is an issue that I care a lot about. But I remember that when there was first talk of ceasefire, Zelensky was saying, President Zelensky was saying, there can't be a ceasefire until the return of the children. But unless I missed it, I don't think there's been any conversation yesterday when we're talking about peace now regarding the children. Is that the case?
Well, forgive me. I think there's let me correct you on just one slight piece of wording there, and I think it's an important piece of wording. I think Zelensky's stated position has been that there can be no long-term peace without the return of the children. And I think that is a position that he has maintained. That there doesn't seem to have been any active discussion over the last 72 hours of the fate of the children. But at least this happened. Mrs. Trump did indeed, via Donald, convey a letter to Vladimir Putin, which was about the children, an unopened letter, which I'm sure that Putin probably tore up. But Zelensky did produce a piece of rather positive presentational political theatre when he produced a letter, which was a thank you letter, we're told, to Mrs. Trump, thanking her for the care that she has shown to the stolen children. So although there haven't been active discussions, at least the issue has been aired, and that is one of the very few positives I believe we can draw from the last 24 hours.
Well, let's take a little break from the children and talk about just overall what your impressions are regarding what's happening with the discussion, like what happened in Alaska and what's happening now. I mean, where do you think we're headed?
Well, this is very much not a case of peace in our time. Still the guns are firing. There is no ceasefire. There is no long-term specific mechanism for the security of Ukraine. It looks as though Russia is going to keep the land that has invaded. It looks as if it's going to get more land that it hasn't yet successfully invaded. There's going to be no reparations paid by Russia, and this very much looks like a Munich or Budapest tribute act. I don't think we're in a good place at all.
So what do you think, what precedent does this set for the world, in your opinion?
Appeasement to dictators has never worked, as far as I can see in any of my study of either recent or long-term history. To me, this looks like a blood-soaked tyrant who is being rewarded for his aggression. And once you reward a tyrant for their aggression, they will crave more and more reward. And I'm afraid it sets a precedent of this happening again and again. I must say, I felt almost physically ill when I saw the man who is, by a long way, the President of the United States, by a long way, the most powerful person in the world, welcoming onto American soil in Alaska with a red carpet and a round of applause Vladimir Putin, who frankly is an obvious war criminal. I found that a precedent that I hope will not be continually repeated, but I fear that it will be.
Well, I have to say that even me personally, I found it very appalling. I'm surprised Donald Trump didn't sell Alaska back to Trump back to Putin while he was there. That's what my afraid.
Or indeed even give it away to him.
That's very true. And once again, I need to reiterate, as I said in the monologue, is that we all want peace. We all want the bloodshed to stop. We all want we people crave peace. But once again, there's a difference between peace and capitulation, and giving in to a tyrant. And what we saw in Alaska, honestly, to me, is just a quest by Donald Trump to try to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And I will just say up front that even if there is some type of peace and he gets the Nobel Peace Prize, I will never have any respect for the Nobel Peace Prize again. That's just what I'm saying up front. Anyway, so let's just keep going. Enough of my personal tirades here. So, okay, at least it's progressing, right? So let's just talk about the fact that Alaska happened. Now the world leaders came to the United States, to the White House to talk. I mean, where, you being Brit, what do you think about Keir Starmer? How do you think he's handling all of this?
Keir Starmer has played things remarkably well, considering his domestic political difficulties here and the way he's presenting himself rather poorly here. He has presented himself very effectively in his dealings with Donald Trump, and we suspect has taken a lead in almost coaching Zelensky in how to deal with Trump after the disastrous piece of bullying in the White House in February. I believe that Starmer has coached Zelensky in what I would call active ghosting, and that's a very specific presentational technique which you have to use when you're speaking to somebody who is powerful, but that you can't afford to really make angry by specifically having conflict of a spoken nature with them. So we had the February meeting between Zelensky and Trump, and Zelensky decided to go full on in Trump's face, and indeed got a massive reaction back, not only from Trump but also from J.D. Vance. So they did a sort of bullying double act. Now Starmer, I believe, has counselled Zelensky to do the active ghosting, and what that means is to make sure that you listen vastly more than you speak, and when the other person is saying things that you find innately obnoxious, that makes you very angry, and which in normal circumstances you would specifically and vocally disagree with, you smile just slightly and you nod just very slightly, and you let it wash over you to a certain extent before eventually making a calculated deflection of what's being said to you, but overall giving the person who's doing the rant towards you the impression that you're listening in a genial, positive way. Now that is a very, very difficult technique, but when you're dealing with Donald Trump, if you don't want conflict with him, that's a technique that you've got to use, and I think Starmer's helped Zelensky to do that.
Well, maybe I should have Keir Starmer give me some lessons as well, so I can master that technique. But just for full disclosure, you can see up above your left-hand shoulder is a picture of you and Donald Trump up there on the wall. So you do have some experience with the gentleman. So let's talk about Europe as a whole. I mean, do you think that Europe? I mean, we had Macron there. We basically had the French, the Brits, the Germans, the Finns, the European Union. I mean, it was a pretty impressive crowd there yesterday. Do you think Europe could be doing more to solve this war? Do you think that they're doing the right thing by turning to America, or do you think that I had advocated a long time ago that Europe just says, the heck with America, let's solve this on our own, but of course nothing happened. But are you satisfied with what Europe has done?
Since the end of the Cold War, every Western European country has shamefully lowered the amount of defense spending that it's carried out. It's reached ridiculously low degrees, and everything that's happened in Ukraine has focused European minds on the fact that spending as a percentage of GDP has to increase. But putting that aside for a moment, Europe had to have a certain input into the Zelensky-Trump interaction, I believe. And this, again, I have to reluctantly applaud Starmer, because he certainly led this. There had to be some mechanism that made sure that Zelensky could not be bullied on his own by J.D. Vance and Donald Trump. And so, almost like Captain America in Avengers Endgame, Keir Starmer assembled the Avengers, a group of them, to come and act as Zelensky's supporters in the interaction of yesterday. And as well as being his supporters, it also meant that those individual European leaders could play into the Trump narrative. Donald Trump likes to be treated like a king, like an emperor. He likes to get obeisance from leaders who he sees as being inferior to him, and them coming to attend his court actually plays into his presidential ego. So everybody won by that cross-European ploy.
I have to say, there's no doubt about it. I'm sure Donald Trump was loving every second of it. The fact that everyone became, knocking on his door, at the White House to hang out with him to try to deal with this issue. So let's go back to the kids' situation, the children's situation. So, what do you think is going to happen in this regard? I mean, where the path of peace is headed? We'll back up. Let's educate the audience a little bit more on stolen children. Like, why are they being stolen and what's happening?
We believe it is a very specific, long-term, sinister policy to make sure that the majority of the population in any areas which are taken over by Russia, and indeed even in areas which are not specifically taken over by Russia, have young people who are essentially agents of the Russian state. Not necessarily openly, but very definitely proactive agents. And this has been a very calculated ploy over a long period of time. And one of the reasons why it has been successful so far is that the world has not been talking about it enough. And the Ukrainian Ombudsman's office, who we have been working with, their job is to make sure that the world does know about it, the world does talk about it, and the world wants to do something about it. And what we're trying to do is a three-pronged operation. And the three prongs are speak, search, and rescue. I've been involved in helping to create the communications and coaching the communicators, including the Ombudsman himself, Dmitry Lubinets, to go around the world, to give interviews, to do keynotes, to make sure that they get enough international support of the project. Secondly, search. Well, we have a very specialized team of searchers, most of them from a military background, of course, who not only are using the most sophisticated techniques in terms of the internet and IT in general, but also doing specific operations to find individual children. And also the third rung of that sequence is rescue. The parents involved, when they're identified as having a stolen child, are not necessarily keen to give them up. And so very specific rescue operations have to be undertaken in order to get them back. Now, that three-pronged approach is very labor intensive. It takes a very long period of time, and it takes money. And it's not easy. It is going to take some time, and there is going to be some angst and conflict involved. But I believe it is a fundamental plank of the road to peace, genuine long-term peace.
Absolutely agree, and just so the audience understands, is that one of the reasons that Putin has been accused of war crimes, and he's up to be by the ICC, International Criminal Court, is because of the stolen children. Let's walk us through that. Like, talk us more about the war crimes issue with Putin.
Well, to me, the Stolen Children Project is actually a form of genocide. They are essentially taking away Ukraine's future. And there's been no denial that this project has been going on. And indeed, there have been face-to-face negotiations between the Ukrainian Ombudsman for Human Rights, and would you believe there is an entity known as the Russian Ombudsman for Human Rights? I find it, my mind boggles at the idea that there could be such a thing. But they do specifically negotiate about certain families or certain groups of families, and there's no denial that this project has occurred. It's the sheer brazen openness of it that I find staggering, and I find it staggering that it hasn't been specifically blasted all over the media, all over the world, as not just a quiet, silent war crime, but something that should be screamed from the rooftops.
Well, once again, I agree with you, because this, what the world has to understand is that, let's put it in black and white terms. Vladimir Putin is stealing children from Ukraine, taking them back to Russia, and doing all types of sorts of things to them, and turning them into, whatever happens. But he is stealing children. Any parent of any kind, think about it. Stealing your children, taking it to another country, and the world's not doing anything about it. So, yes, peace is important. We need to solve this war. People need to stop dying. But this man, Putin, is stealing children. And so this goes back to what you said originally, is where you see that President Trump just was smiling and applauding him as he's walking up. This is, once again, a man who has stolen 19,000 or maybe up to 70-something thousand children. And it's just
and surely, Dane, it's one of these things which, as a hardcore, sometimes hard-nosed, and you might see uncaring presentational professional, you can often see on many contentious political issues that reluctantly, even though one heavily believes in one side, that there's always another side to the argument. Whether you believe that Israel is justified or not in its constant response to the 7th of October atrocities, there are two sides to that argument, conceivably. But this issue, the issue of stealing the children of another country, there is no other side to the argument. There is nobody who can say, well, actually, Putin's doing a good thing here. You have to remember the background. He's actually giving a good life and a good future to these children. Nobody exists in the world, I believe, who could make that argument. And it's perhaps because there is no counter argument that it makes it so difficult to scream, because some people just can't believe it.
I agree. Well, listen, Graham, sadly we're out of time. I really appreciate you being with us today, and I look forward to having you back, and good luck with everything that you're doing, and it's very critical work that you're doing, so I applaud your efforts. So thanks for being with us today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Dane.
Thank you. Let's take a quick break from Around the World with Dane Waters, and we'll be back with our next guest.